Imagine standing in a grocery store, staring at a carton of eggs that now cost nearly $6, when just 3 years ago you paid $2.50. You have not changed your habits. You have not upgraded your lifestyle. Yet somehow, everything costs more. Everyday Americans are working longer hours, taking on second jobs, and cutting back on basics just to stay afloat. Here is a question worth sitting with. Does it feel like your paycheck is shrinking, even though the number on it stays the same? That feeling is not paranoia. It is not laziness. It is a real, measurable crisis unfolding across this country. And the answer to why this is happening goes far deeper than most people realize. By the end of this video, you will understand the true forces driving the cost of living crisis in America. In this video, we are going to break down the real root causes, the ones mainstream media glosses over, in a straightforward and honest way you can actually use. Two working parents, one a nurse, the other an accountant. Together, they bring home over $100,000 a year. By every traditional measure, they should be comfortable. But after rent, groceries, childcare, insurance, and student loan payments, there is almost nothing left at the end of the month. They are one unexpected car repair away from financial crisis. Sound familiar? Because this is not a rare story. This is happening in cities across America, from Raleigh to Riverside, from Kansas City to Louisville. Millions of households earning what used to be considered good money are now barely keeping their heads above water. Built on structural shifts that were largely ignored until they became impossible to deny, after World War II, something remarkable happened in America. Wages and productivity grew almost in perfect lockstep. If workers produced more, they earned more. It was not a perfect system, but for millions of Americans, it meant a genuinely achievable middle-class life. A home, a car, a family vacation, and a retirement plan. That relationship held steady for roughly 3 decades. Then, somewhere around the 1970s and 1980s, something quietly broke. Productivity kept climbing, but wages began to flatline. So what exactly is inflation, and why should you care? At its core, inflation is simple. When more money chases fewer goods, prices rise. Think of it like an auction where everyone suddenly has more cash to spend, but the number of items up for bid stays the same. Sellers charge more because they can. Now, some inflation is actually healthy. Economists generally target around 2% annually because it encourages spending and investment. The problem is, the United States has experienced brutal spikes that permanently reset prices to higher levels, never returning to where they were before. Consider this. A dozen eggs that cost around $1.50 a decade ago now regularly sits above $4. A gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, basic staples, all dramatically more expensive. These are not temporary blips. These new price levels have become the permanent reality for American families, stretching every single dollar. Some of it was a deliberate choice made in a boardroom, not a warehouse. While you were stretching every dollar at the grocery store, many of America's largest corporations were quietly celebrating record-breaking profit margins. This is where the term greedflation comes in, a concept gaining serious traction among economists. The idea is straightforward. When supply chain chaos and pandemic-era inflation gave corporations cover to raise prices, many of them raised prices far beyond what their actual cost increases justified. They used the crisis as an opportunity, and the numbers back this up. Corporate profit margins reached historic highs between 2021 and 2023. Now let's talk about housing, because this might be where everyday Americans feel the squeeze most painfully. The dream of homeownership, once a cornerstone of middle-class life, has become virtually unattainable for millions of younger Americans. But why? It comes down to several compounding forces hitting all at once. First, housing supply has failed to keep pace with demand for decades. Second, institutional investors, massive corporations, and hedge funds began purchasing single-family homes at scale, treating neighborhoods like investment portfolios rather than communities. Third, restrictive zoning laws, many dating back 50 or 60 years, have blocked the construction of affordable multifamily housing in cities where people actually want to live. The result is devastating. Home prices have doubled or even tripled in many markets over the past 2 decades. And for those who cannot buy, renting offers little relief. Rent prices have surged dramatically across nearly every major and mid-sized city in America, consuming an ever-growing share of household income. The result is that millions of Americans skip medications, avoid doctor visits, and face financial ruin simply trying to stay healthy. The United States spends more per capita on healthcare than any other developed nation on Earth, yet life expectancy and overall health outcomes are not proportionally better. That disconnect should raise serious questions. The system Americans navigate daily is extraordinarily complex. Insurance companies, hospital networks, pharmacy benefit managers, and pharmaceutical corporations all operate within a layered structure that prioritizes profit over patient care. A single hospital visit can result in bills totaling tens of thousands of dollars, even for insured individuals. Prescription drug prices in America are often 3 to 10 times higher than the exact same medication sold in Canada or Europe. Now let's keep going, because we have covered a tremendous amount of ground in just the last few minutes, and there is still so much more to unpack. We have talked about inflation, corporate greed, the housing crisis, and the broken healthcare system, and every single one of these issues directly affects your wallet and your future. If you are watching this and thinking, finally, someone is explaining this in a way that actually makes sense, then this channel was made for you. This is exactly what we do here. We take complex economic and social issues and break them down in plain, honest language. Now let's talk about something that has quietly devastated an entire generation before they even received their first real paycheck. The cost of higher education in America has exploded over the past several decades, rising at rates that make general inflation look modest by comparison. A degree that cost a few $1,000s in the 1980s now routinely runs into the hundreds of thousands. But why? 3 major forces are at work here. First, state governments gradually reduced funding for public universities, shifting the financial burden directly onto students. Second, universities expanded their administrative staff at staggering rates, creating layers of bureaucracy that drive up operating costs without improving education quality. Third, and perhaps most damaging, easy access to federal student loans gave universities a blank check. When students can always borrow more, schools face no real pressure to control costs. The result is a generation entering the workforce already buried in debt, with no clear path out. Companies had already reset their pricing, and consumers were left holding the bill permanently. The global supply chain was built for one thing: maximum efficiency. Companies sourced materials from the cheapest places on Earth, kept minimal inventory, and relied on perfectly timed deliveries. It worked beautifully, until it didn't. When COVID-19 hit, that entire system collapsed almost overnight. Factories shut down, ports backed up, and suddenly there were critical shortages everywhere. Microchips, which power everything from cars to refrigerators, became nearly impossible to source. Shipping container costs skyrocketed by over 400% at their peak. Raw materials dried up across dozens of industries simultaneously. Now let's talk about the Federal Reserve, because its decisions have played a massive role in where we are today. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed slashed interest rates to near zero, essentially flooding the economy with cheap money. This sounds helpful, but what it actually did was inflate asset prices. Stocks soared, real estate skyrocketed, and the wealthy, who owned most of these assets, got significantly richer. Meanwhile, everyday Americans saw little benefit. Then, when inflation exploded post-pandemic, the Fed reversed course aggressively, hiking rates at the fastest pace in decades. Suddenly, mortgage rates doubled. Credit card interest climbed past 20%. Business loans became brutally expensive. For working Americans already stretched thin, this was another gut punch. The very tool designed to stabilize the economy ended up making daily financial survival even harder for millions of ordinary people. Now let's return to wages, because this piece of the puzzle deserves a much closer look. Over the past 50 years, American worker productivity has increased by roughly 60%. That means workers are producing significantly more value per hour than previous generations. But here is the striking part. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, for the bottom half of earners have barely moved during that same period. We are talking about decades of harder, faster, smarter work that generated enormous wealth, yet the people doing that work saw almost none of it reflected in their paychecks. So where did that wealth go? Largely to shareholders, executives, and investors. This gap between what workers produce and what they actually take home is not an accident. It is the result of deliberate policy choices and power shifts in the economy. And it is a core structural reason why the cost of living feels so crushingly unmanageable for so many Americans today. And that gap between what workers produce and what they actually take home is just one piece of a much larger puzzle we are still working through together. There is genuinely a lot more ground to cover in this video, and things are about to get even more eye-opening as we dig into government policy, wealth inequality, and what other countries are doing differently. But real quick, if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, right now is honestly a great time to do that. This channel regularly breaks down the economic forces that shape your daily life, from inflation and housing to wages and policy, in a way that is straightforward and easy to follow. Hitting that subscribe button means you will never miss content that could help you better understand the world around you. Alright, let us keep going, because the next layer of this story involves powerful interests that most people rarely hear about. Government policy, or the deliberate absence of it, has played a massive role in where we are today. For decades, powerful industries like pharmaceuticals, real estate, and finance have poured billions of dollars into lobbying efforts, essentially paying to shape the laws that govern them. The result is legislation that consistently protects corporate profits over the financial well-being of ordinary Americans. Drug companies lobby against price negotiation. Real estate investors push for tax advantages that make it harder for regular buyers to compete. Wall Street fights against regulations that would limit risky behavior. Meanwhile, tax breaks for large corporations and wealthy investors have quietly drained public resources. Funding for education, infrastructure, and social services gets cut, and that burden gets shifted directly onto working and middle-class Americans through higher out-of-pocket costs and reduced support systems. The system is not broken by accident. It was shaped this way intentionally. And layered on top of all of this is something that rarely gets discussed honestly. Extreme wealth inequality. When a small percentage of the population controls a disproportionate share of wealth, their spending habits and investment decisions reshape entire markets. Ultra-wealthy buyers drive up real estate prices in city after city, not because they need homes, but because property is an asset class. That pressure trickles down, pushing middle-class buyers into less desirable markets and pricing out lower-income renters entirely. The same dynamic plays out in luxury goods, private healthcare, and exclusive education. Over time, the broader economy begins catering almost exclusively to those at the top, designing products, services, and pricing structures around their purchasing power. For everyone else, costs rise while options shrink. This is not just inequality in the abstract. It is a structural force actively making everyday life more expensive for the majority of Americans. The data makes that undeniably clear. Several European nations, including Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway, have significantly lower cost of living burdens relative to income. And the reasons are structural, not accidental. These countries have universal healthcare systems that eliminate catastrophic medical bills. They have stronger tenant protections that prevent landlords from arbitrarily doubling rent overnight. They heavily subsidize higher education, meaning young people enter adulthood without crippling debt, and they maintain robust social safety nets that catch people before they fall into financial ruin. Now, this is not about promoting any particular political ideology. This is simply about understanding cause and effect. Neighbors helping neighbors, sharing resources, skills, and knowledge, creates a buffer that no economic policy can easily take away. There are real concrete steps you can take right now to protect your financial well-being. Start with financial literacy. Understanding how money, credit, and investing work gives you an enormous advantage in a system that rarely explains itself clearly. Next, diversify your income. Whether that means freelancing, a side business, or passive income through investments, relying on a single paycheck is increasingly risky in today's economy. Make informed consumer choices. Support businesses that treat workers fairly and avoid predatory financial products that trap you in cycles of debt. Advocate for policy change. Your story matters, and this community is listening. The cost of living crisis is not the result of one bad decision or one bad year. It is the product of decades of corporate pricing power, housing shortages, crushing healthcare costs, wage stagnation, and policy failures that consistently prioritized profits over people. These forces did not happen in isolation. They built on each other, and ordinary Americans have been absorbing the consequences ever since. But here is the truth that matters most. Understanding the system is how you begin to change it. Staying informed is not passive. It is the foundation of demanding better. If this video helped you connect the dots, please hit the like button right now.